Bank Auditor vanished in 1991. 11 years later, what they found in the river changed everything. She balanced the books with precision, a quiet constant in a city of shifting fortunes. But one cold night in 1991, everything changed. A respected bank auditor walked out of her office and into history. No calls, no distress signal, no trace. Why did her access credentials vanish hours before she did? Who authorized the late-night vault entry she was never meant to make? And what was discovered buried beneath a Chicago bridge more than a decade later that reopened the case and reignited suspicion that someone powerful had wanted her gone? Before we begin, take a second and comment the time in your part of the world right now. You might be surprised how many of us are watching at the exact same moment, like we're all connected by this story. Claire Hensley was a familiar face at First National Bank in downtown Chicago, a fixture of quiet competence in a glass tower that hummed with the rhythm of finance. With 8 years in auditing, she was known for her sharp mind, calm voice, and her uncanny ability to spot discrepancies others missed. Colleagues said she had a gift for precision, that she could trace a missing cent across a sea of numbers, that she believed in structure, accountability, and the kind of order that only spreadsheets could provide. She lived alone in a small apartment overlooking the river, commuted by train, and spent most evenings in her office long after the lights had dimmed on the upper floors. Routine, steady, reliable, that was Claire. On the evening of January 3, 1991, she signed out of her last internal audit session at 11:12 p.m., according to building logs. Outside, snow drifted between the skyscrapers, falling in quiet spirals that blanketed the city in white. Surveillance footage showed her walking through the marble lobby, clutching a manila folder to her chest, pausing briefly near the revolving doors, then turning back toward the secured corridor that led to the sublevel archives. She was supposed to leave the building, but something made her return. The cameras caught her swiping her badge one last time near the basement elevators at 11:17 p.m. The doors opened. She stepped inside. She never came out. At 7:40 the next morning, a janitor noticed the light still glowing inside her cubicle. Her coffee cup was half full, her computer screen frozen on an empty spreadsheet. Her coat hung neatly on her chair, her purse under the desk, and her car still parked in the employee garage, locked from the inside. The first thought was exhaustion. Maybe she had gone home late, forgotten to clock out, but by noon, when she failed to show up for a mandatory quarterly audit briefing, her supervisor filed an absence report. By afternoon, she was officially listed as missing. Police were called that evening, though the initial search yielded little. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and no ransom demand. Her apartment was orderly, the kind of neatness that suggested she'd intended to come back. Only one thing seemed off: the contents of her desk drawer. Folders labeled with her handwriting were gone, including one marked Keystone, a name that appeared nowhere in the bank's files. IT logs later revealed that Claire's access credentials had been revoked just hours before she vanished, a security action approved by a senior systems officer after detected anomalies. When investigators questioned the department head, he claimed the lockdown was routine maintenance, a coincidence of timing. But the digital logs told another story. Her account wasn't just frozen, it was erased. Within 48 hours, federal auditors were quietly called in under the pretext of reviewing internal compliance. But those files, too, disappeared from circulation weeks later. It was as if every trace of Claire Hensley's last days, her emails, her reports, her login history, had been deliberately scrubbed. And beneath the polished floors of First National Bank, whispers began to spread that Claire had stumbled onto something much bigger than an accounting error, something that could never see daylight again. In the days that followed Claire's disappearance, the atmosphere inside First National Bank changed in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Conversations stopped when investigators entered the room. Whispers carried through the corridors, and people who once greeted each other in the break room now avoided eye contact entirely. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something no one wanted to name. The official narrative was that Claire had left unexpectedly, that stress or overwork had driven her to vanish, but those who knew her, the few colleagues who truly did, insisted she would never abandon unfinished work, especially not in the middle of a major audit. Something didn't add up. Detectives began to notice anomalies in her last week of activity. Claire had printed several ledgers from restricted accounts, all belonging to corporate subsidiaries that didn't technically exist. Each document was time-stamped between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., times when access required executive-level clearance. Yet the security logs showed her credentials as active, meaning someone had reauthorized her after hours. The IT department claimed no knowledge of this. When pressed, they produced an internal request form with a forged signature, granting her temporary investigative access. The name on the approval line belonged to a senior vice president, a man who happened to be traveling overseas the same night Claire vanished. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger it became. There were wire transfers that looped back into shell corporations registered under the same address, consulting firms that existed only on paper, and millions of dollars moving in circular routes every quarter. Claire had been tracing those loops for months, building a case that pointed toward internal fraud and embezzlement. She'd written in one email, recovered only from a personal backup, that she believed the fraud extended beyond financial misconduct, possibly into federal misreporting and political contributions. The message was never sent. It sat in her drafts folder, dated 2 days before she disappeared. Meanwhile, maintenance staff recalled something odd the night she went missing. Around 11:30 p.m., a delivery van had been parked by the loading dock, unusual for that hour, since all deliveries ended by 9. Security logs showed no record of the vehicle entering or leaving, yet tire marks in the snow matched its pattern. When police requested footage from the exterior cameras, they were told the drives had malfunctioned during the storm, erasing data between 11:15 and 12 a.m., the exact window of her disappearance. 2 weeks later, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Chicago Police Department. Inside was a photocopy of a ledger page marked Project Keystone, the same name written on the missing folder from Claire's desk. The page showed unbalanced entries tied to accounts in the Cayman Islands, but in the margin, someone had scrawled a handwritten note. She found it. Vault 9. Investigators traced the document's watermark and discovered it belonged to a restricted archive room 3 levels beneath the bank, one few employees even knew existed. When authorities requested access, the door was sealed, and the security manager claimed it had been decommissioned years prior. But when engineers finally pried it open, they found it had been used recently. The air still carried the faint metallic scent of machinery, and the dust was disturbed along a narrow path leading to a storage locker at the far end. Inside, there was nothing but a cracked keycard and a single flash drive taped beneath a vent. Forensics recovered fragments of data from that drive, encrypted, partially corrupted, but enough to piece together a trail of transaction codes. Each one corresponded to a hidden account used by top executives, funneling money into personal trusts. Among the initials listed was KH, belonging to Kevin Hale, the bank's vice president of finance. When questioned, Hale denied all involvement, claiming ignorance of any missing employee or secret accounts. But within a month, he abruptly resigned and left the country for a sabbatical. Internal HR records later revealed he had cashed out his pension and relocated to Zurich. Then came the break investigators hadn't expected. A storage facility on the outskirts of Evanston reported a payment from Claire's account 5 days after she disappeared. The unit had been registered under an alias, C. Henry, but the signature on the lease matched her handwriting. Inside, detectives found a metal box containing a stack of cassette tapes, several bank statements, and a note folded into the lid. It read, "If I'm gone, it means they found me. The truth is in the numbers." The tapes were faint but audible. Claire's voice could be heard narrating her discoveries, lists of accounts, movements of funds, dates, and names. The last tape cut abruptly with a single sentence. "I think they know I've seen the vault logs." By the time the recordings were authenticated, it was clear Claire hadn't just stumbled onto fraud. She'd uncovered a network of illegal money movements tied to government contracts, foreign transfers, and something labeled Operation Keystone. The line between corporate corruption and organized crime had blurred, and Claire Hensley had vanished right at its intersection. The night of January 3rd unfolded with an unnerving precision, a pattern of controlled movements that suggested planning rather than coincidence. Investigators would later reconstruct her final hours through fragments, digital footprints, magnetic card swipes, partial surveillance frames, pieces of a puzzle that, when aligned, revealed something far darker than a simple disappearance. At 10:58 p.m., Claire downloaded several encrypted spreadsheets from the internal audit server, bypassing standard access permissions. She then printed 2 of them, documents investigators later determined linked to the offshore transfer accounts marked under Project Keystone. At 11:09 p.m., she logged into the sub-level security system using a temporary passcode that did not belong to her, one issued earlier that day under the name of another employee who had already gone home. From there, she moved toward the lower corridors, where the restricted vaults and archived records were kept, areas accessible only to a handful of executives and senior auditors. The cameras caught her reflection in the polished elevator doors, the faint glint of fluorescent light across the manila folder in her hands, and then the footage cut to static. When the feed resumed 12 minutes later, the elevator was empty, the doors half open, and the timestamp advanced by exactly 7 minutes, too precise to be a system malfunction. What happened in that gap remained a mystery until forensics analyzed the building's electrical logs. The power grid for sublevel 3 had been briefly rerouted, an action that could only be done manually from inside the maintenance room adjacent to Vault 9, the same vault she had written on her note. The override lasted 11 minutes, long enough to disable cameras, keycard logs, and motion sensors. During that blackout, someone else entered the building through the employee loading dock. There was no recorded ID swipe, but investigators later found salt residue from de-icing compounds used on security vehicles, a detail that placed the intruder as someone with internal clearance, possibly security staff. By cross-referencing network pings, analysts discovered an external connection made to the bank's private server during that same time window, a remote login trace to an IP address associated with Kevin Hale's office suite. Though Hale himself was allegedly in Zurich, flight records revealed he had not departed O'Hare until the following afternoon. He had been in Chicago that night. Sometime between 11:20 and 11:45 p.m., Claire's badge registered one final access, Vault 9. The interior motion detectors captured movement for less than 90 seconds before freezing completely. The vault's heavy steel door was later found slightly ajar, though its locking mechanism showed no signs of tampering. A small blood smear was detected on the inner hinge, later confirmed as a DNA match to Claire, suggesting she was injured but mobile. When authorities finally entered the vault days later, they found evidence of a hurried search. Folders thrown open, stacks of records shifted, one drawer pried from its frame. Among the debris, a maintenance glove lay on the floor, smeared with ink from carbon transfer sheets. Embedded within that ink were microscopic glass fibers consistent with the interior of Claire's flash drive casing, which was missing from her office. She had been there, and she had left something behind. Outside the bank, the snowstorm intensified that night, erasing tire tracks and footprints within minutes. The security van observed earlier by maintenance staff never appeared on any tollway camera leaving the city. It was as if it had vanished into the storm itself. At 1:14 a.m., traffic cameras near the river bridge captured a faint silhouette of a vehicle resembling that same model, heading north with its headlights dimmed. 23 minutes later, a call was logged from a nearby payphone. A single ring to an unlisted number later traced to the bank's internal operations division. The call lasted 19 seconds. The next morning, a city worker clearing snow along the bridge found a torn fragment of paper partially frozen to the railing. The edges were burned, the ink blurred, but the words were still legible. "They're not who you think they are." The handwriting matched Claire's. By dawn, her car still sat untouched in the garage, her desk light still glowing, and her name began to fade from the morning shift log. Somewhere between those 12 missing minutes and the first rays of sunrise, Claire Hensley, auditor, truth seeker, and accidental whistleblower, had been erased from both the building and the records she had tried to protect. The investigation began with routine procedure. Missing person report filed by a coworker when Claire failed to show for her morning audit, followed by a welfare check that quickly became a scene of unease. Her apartment was untouched, bed made, breakfast dishes rinsed, the kind of sterile order that suggested intention rather than absence. The only anomaly was her open briefcase on the dining table, containing her ID badge, a half-filled notebook, and a crumpled receipt from a 24-hour gas station timestamped 12:07 a.m., nearly an hour after her last recorded keycard swipe at the bank. The attendant remembered nothing unusual except that the woman seemed quiet, focused, and in a hurry, buying only coffee and a single pack of batteries. Detectives followed her trail back to the bank, combing through surveillance, electronic records, and personnel logs. It didn't take long for inconsistencies to appear. The system showed gaps in network activity, corrupted camera files, and missing audio recordings from the security booth. A server engineer later admitted under questioning that he'd been told to clean up the drive the next morning due to what his supervisor called a glitch during the storm. That supervisor, a man named Kenneth Doyle, resigned 2 days later, citing personal reasons and relocating out of state before investigators could re-interview him. By the end of the first week, the case had already outgrown local jurisdiction. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit stepped in after discovering several irregular transfers tied to one of the accounts Claire had flagged, connecting the bank to a suspected offshore laundering network operating under shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The investigation was quietly reclassified, and most of the original case files were sealed pending federal review. For the detectives who remained, the sense of unease grew thicker. It was as if Claire had not just vanished, but had been deliberately erased from the narrative. Then came the first break. A tow truck operator in Joliet reported finding an abandoned security van matching the description of the one seen near the bank that night. It was parked behind an old rail yard warehouse, the license plates removed, the interior scrubbed clean. Only one item remained inside: a torn plastic sleeve from a keycard holder, marked with faint fingerprints later matched to Claire. Forensics also found traces of de-icing compound identical to the residue discovered in the bank's loading bay. Whoever had taken her, or whatever had happened, had started there. The next lead surfaced unexpectedly from inside the bank itself. A junior accountant named Drew Maxwell came forward with a flash drive he claimed had been slipped under his office door in a blank envelope. On it were partial spreadsheets, fragmentary exports from Project Keystone, along with an audio file, distorted and cut short, where Claire's voice could be faintly heard saying, "If this gets out, they'll bury everything." The metadata placed the file's creation time just before 11 p.m. on the night she disappeared. Investigators traced the audio's waveform to determine its recording source, concluding it was likely captured from Claire's dictation recorder, a device missing from her personal effects. Days later, in a search of the bank's sub-basement storage, technicians discovered the recorder behind a false ventilation panel, battery corroded but memory intact. When recovered, it revealed hours of notes, detailing inconsistencies in client accounts, unexplained ledger gaps, and references to meetings between Kevin Hale and unnamed external consultants who were allegedly overseeing the hidden transfers. The deeper they dug, the more the case became about everyone except Claire. The internal audit system had been manipulated for years, with coded entries masking embezzlement tied to multiple corporate entities. Every time investigators moved closer to identifying the players involved, documents vanished, access logs reset, or witnesses recanted. It was a web of intimidation that stretched beyond the bank's marble facade. Then, nearly 3 weeks after her disappearance, a city diver recovered a small evidence bag from the icy river near the bridge where the mysterious call had originated. Inside was a badge clip, rusted and bent, along with a folded note encased in plastic. The writing was faint but legible. "If I'm gone, check the bridge records." The note bore Claire's initials. That clue led detectives to the Department of Transportation's maintenance records, where one inspection log from the night of January 3rd stood out. A permit request for a structural survey signed under the name of a company that did not exist. Its listed contact number traced back to a prepaid phone purchased by an alias known to be used by Kenneth Doyle. The FBI obtained warrants for Doyle's residence and storage facilities. In one of them, hidden inside an old file cabinet, they found rolls of undeveloped 35mm film, multiple ledger copies, and a damaged notebook in Claire's handwriting describing her final investigation into money that doesn't exist on paper. The last line read, "They think I don't know about the bridge, but that's where the truth is stored." 2 months later, authorities executed a search at a disused warehouse near the same rail yard where the van had been abandoned. Beneath a false floor, they uncovered a hidden archive, crates of shredded documents, obsolete drives, and fragments of bank seals. DNA analysis of one torn piece of cloth recovered from that site matched a partial profile belonging to Claire. It was not enough to prove death, but enough to prove presence. The final piece came from the most unexpected source, a retired IT technician who, during a routine audit of decommissioned hardware, found a tape drive labeled Bridgeway. Inside were encrypted backups of internal communications referencing containment of Hensley inquiry, orders allegedly signed by Kevin Hale himself. It confirmed what many had suspected all along. Claire had stumbled into an operation far larger than her department, an organized laundering network shielded by people in power. And yet, even with the evidence mounting, no body was ever found, no one ever charged with her disappearance. The investigation had solved the mechanics, but not the mystery, unraveling the system, but never recovering the soul at the center of it. The woman who tried to expose it all and paid the price in silence. For months after the investigation stalled, what remained were fragments, a trail of evidence too deliberate to be coincidence, yet too incomplete to secure closure. Claire's story became a labyrinth of motives and power, each path twisting into another, every discovery raising new questions that seemed designed to loop investigators in circles. The bank called it a tragedy of circumstance, an unfortunate disappearance linked to stress and paranoia. But those who had seen the files, those who had heard the suppressed recordings, knew better. The first layer of motive was obvious: money. The financial web that Claire uncovered revealed not just laundering, but systematic manipulation of federal relief funds, routed through fake consultancies into offshore accounts under political shelf fronts. Hale's name appeared frequently, yet always indirectly, like a ghost written into margins. But the scope suggested something larger, a collective effort shielded by bureaucratic layers, with the bank serving as the perfect front. Claire's reports had begun connecting internal transfers to campaign contributions and defense contracts, and that alone was enough to make her dangerous. Then there was the human motive, fear. The deeper investigators probed, The more people within the institution began to withdraw, transferring departments or resigning altogether. Files vanished overnight. Hard drives were reformatted. One analyst who had helped cross-reference Hale's travel logs died in what police called a traffic accident on a clear day. Another, a compliance officer, was hospitalized after a supposed home invasion. Each incident, though isolated on paper, fit too neatly into a timeline of silencing. The investigation was no longer about finding Claire, but surviving her truth. What no one could fully explain was her behavior in the days leading up to her disappearance. Colleagues described her as distant, working late, and carrying a camcorder she often set beside her desk, recording voice memos long after everyone had gone home. That camcorder was never found. Yet a single tape fragment surfaced months later during a clean-out of an evidence storage locker mislabeled under an unrelated case. The tape contained audio of what sounded like Claire's voice, faint but clear. They think the files are deleted. They don't know about Bridgeway. The name matched the encrypted label found in the recovered backup drives, suggesting that Claire had discovered something critical, something worth killing or covering for. The theory emerged that Operation Bridgeway wasn't just an internal laundering route, but a cooperative network involving state contracts and intelligence-linked operations designed to funnel money under classified pretexts. A retired DEA analyst later confirmed that the codename had appeared in restricted archives relating to mid-80s narcotics interdictions, operations known to have blurred lines between law enforcement and covert funding. If that was true, Claire hadn't just found corruption inside her bank. She'd uncovered an active conduit feeding a federal network not meant to exist on record. But the most haunting discovery came when investigators reopened the abandoned warehouse where the film rolls had been found. Behind a loose panel, sealed inside a metal file box, lay a series of handwritten notes on yellow ledger paper. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, but undeniably Claire's. They described a series of meetings she'd arranged with an unnamed contact who had promised to leak information to the press. Her last entry read, "He said if I go missing, it's because I was right. If he goes missing, it's because he told me too much." The page ended mid-sentence, ink smeared as if her pen had slipped. To this day, no one knows who that contact was. Phone records suggested calls to a prepaid number registered to a man later found dead in another state under suspicious circumstances. His death was ruled an overdose, though toxicology never matched the reported substances. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. The mystery, then, wasn't just what happened to Claire, it was how far the cover-up reached. Each attempt to close the file only deepened the uncertainty, hinting at the existence of protection orders, erased communications, and internal directives ordering the investigation to cease pursuit. Some theorized Claire had been placed into protective custody, her disappearance a smokescreen for a deal made behind closed doors. Others believed she had been silenced permanently and her traces deliberately staged to fracture the timeline. Whatever the truth, the motive seemed to exist somewhere between greed and fear, a collision of profit and preservation. Claire had exposed something vast, and those implicated chose erasure over exposure. She had not disappeared by accident. She had been removed like an inconvenient entry in a ledger, her name deleted so the balance could remain clean. And even now, decades later, her ghost lingers in the gaps, in redacted memos, missing timestamp logs, and a single anonymous letter mailed to her sister years after the case went cold. It contained only one line. Bridgeway was never shut down. She tried to stop it. We finished the work. By the time the federal task force officially closed the Hensley case, nearly 2 years had passed. The final report was sterile and understated, a document of quiet erasure that framed her disappearance as an unresolved missing person case with elements of occupational stress and voluntary departure. The words felt hollow, engineered to end questions rather than answer them. Those who had followed the case knew better. The documents, the recordings, the vanished witnesses, they pointed toward a narrative no one dared to write officially, one where truth had a price and silence was currency. Her family received her personal effects in a sealed envelope, a pen, her ID badge, and the burned scrap of her note recovered from the bridge. The flash drive, the tapes, the files that could have proven everything were never returned. Marlene Hensley, her younger sister, fought for years to have the case reopened, filing appeals, petitions, and even staging a small protest outside the federal building downtown, holding a poster that read, "Where is Claire?" Each request was denied on grounds of insufficient new evidence. Yet closure never came, not even in the form of finality. In 1991, a journalist investigating offshore finance schemes in the same region uncovered a cache of sealed documents referencing a defunct operation under the codename Bridgeway. Among them was a memorandum describing collateral loss during containment procedures, dated within days of Claire's disappearance. The journalist's report never aired. He vanished weeks later while traveling to meet a source in Miami. His car was found abandoned, keys still in the ignition. Years passed, and the world moved on. The bank rebranded, merged, and dissolved under new leadership. Kevin Hale retired to Europe, never charged, his name eventually washed clean by time and distance. Kenneth Doyle died in 1998 from what was labeled a hunting accident, though his death certificate listed pending under the investigation box. The files that might have connected them to Claire were sealed permanently under the National Security Classification Clause, ensuring that the public would never see them. Still, traces of her lingered, sightings reported across the Midwest, an anonymous call claiming she had been seen living under another name, a cryptic message sent to an independent investigator containing one of Claire's old audit signatures. None could be verified, yet none could be disproven. For her family, hope became its own form of imprisonment, a never-ending loop between belief and acceptance. In 2002, construction workers renovating the river bridge uncovered a rusted metal box embedded in the concrete near the support beam. Inside was a small notebook sealed in plastic. The handwriting matched Claire's. The final page carried only a single line, blurred by moisture yet still legible. The truth doesn't drown, it waits. For investigators who had once sworn to solve her case, it was both a revelation and a wound, proof that she had been there, and that she knew her story might only surface long after those responsible were gone. The discovery was filed into evidence, quietly cataloged, and never released to the public. And so, the official story ended where it began, with a woman who asked too many questions, a system that looked the other way, and a trail of paper that refused to burn completely. Her disappearance remained unsolved, but her defiance survived in every unanswered line, every erased timestamp, every shadow that lingered in the records. The case was over, yet nothing felt finished. Some stories end not with answers, but with echoes, faint, unrelenting reminders that truth doesn't always surface when or how we expect it to. Claire Hensley's disappearance was more than a crime. It was a mirror held up to a system that thrives in silence. She wasn't the first to vanish for asking the wrong questions, and she won't be the last. Her name faded from headlines, her case archived in the gray corners of bureaucracy, but the patterns she exposed still ripple through every institution built on secrecy and greed. Maybe she was silenced. Maybe she was saved. Or maybe she became one more ghost in America's long history of vanished truth-tellers. People who saw something they weren't supposed to and paid for it with everything they had. What's left are fragments. A burned note, a missing camcorder, a voice that warned us before it disappeared into the noise. So what happens when the ones who protect the truth become the ones who bury it? How many others like Claire have disappeared, their files sealed, their voices erased? And more importantly, if you stumbled upon what she found, what would you do? Would you turn away, or would you risk becoming the next name no one dares to speak? Maybe that's the real question this story leaves behind. Not where Claire went, but why no one followed her. Because somewhere out there, beneath layers of silence and time, the truth is still waiting to be found. If you want to help uncover stories like this, forgotten cases, buried evidence, and unanswered questions, make sure you subscribe and join us next time on Last Clue, where every secret has a shadow, and every shadow has a story.